Guess I'm gonna try Twitter again. What a beautiful start to a tale that I can never forget. This is Greg. A dude is concerned that the egg smell in the train is from a fart, yet he's still willing to make a beautiful egg meal a few days later. But that's not important. A bit of foreshadowing, maybe. Anyways, on October 27th, 2018, he discovered that his grandfather died. Because of his grandfather's death, Greg found himself receiving ownership of his grandfather's house in the woods, a quiet, chilly location up in the mountains near a lake and far from other homes that seemed to be empty. In the past, Greg only met his grandfather once, and when he tries asking his mother about his grandfather, she would change the subject or be annoyed. There's clearly conflict between those two. Anyways, because of this, Greg literally knows close to nothing about his grandfather. All he can do is stay in the house until he sells it off, but that is quite a challenge. During his stay on the third day, something unusual happened. After returning from a supply run at the little town 25 minutes away, he found an artifact, so he calls it, on his door. A triangle made up of sticks with bones in the center. Oh, what a nice housewarming gift. Greg threw it in the fireplace. Maybe a kid is pulling a prank on him or something. The next day rolls around and Greg just wants to enjoy his coffee on his deck, but he found another artifact hanging on a tree nearby. But there was a stick in the middle instead of bones. Look, there's another one! And another one! Wow, there's a lot. Specifically 8 were found scattered around. Bones, rocks, feathers, each had something. Greg surprisingly wasn't freaked out by this and just assumed someone was putting up ugly Christmas ornaments. He was annoyed more than anything. He burned them. Honestly, if I was in Greg's shoes, I would be scared, but maybe I'm just a scaredy cat. Anyways, all the artifacts were burned. Greg started to fix up around the house because he can't sell a house if it's not presentable. And he decided to start off by cleaning the yard. While raking, he discovered something dark on the ground near the trees. When he went to investigate, it turns out it was just a hoodie. But that wasn't all. Other pieces of clothes, trash, and a notebook were also found nearby. When he checked the notebook, it was pretty much empty. Pages were missing, and the pages that did have markings on them were just shadow pen marks. This freaked out Greg. Sure, a notebook spooks you, but not creepy-looking artifacts? Wow, okay. Anyways, Greg assumed someone was camping in the woods near his home, which, caused him to have a little bit of a lack of good sleep that night. I mean, I would be concerned too. The next day arrived, and all the strange things were gone, and Greg chopped it off to a homeless person passing by. October 29th, Greg went on a supply run, and when he returned, he walked around his house and saw movement near the trees, which caused him to freeze. Spooky. Someone in a dark hood was staring at the house and didn't seem to notice Greg. Greg pulled out his phone to snap a photo, which is the one you're seeing right now, and after snapping this photo, the person ran back into the woods. Greg considered calling the police, but decided not to. The person was just staring at his house, which wasn't exactly a crime, and because he burned all the funny artifacts, he doesn't exactly have any evidence to suggest he's being tormented. So he locked all the doors in his house to make sure no one enters and went to visit the lake. While sitting by the lake, Greg considered hopping into his car and leaving, but couldn't because of the problems that could happen if he does. He owns the house now, he's kind of responsible for it. So he's pretty much stuck. He can only hope that it's a squatter who will eventually leave after realizing he's sticking around. Nightfall started approaching and Greg had to return home, but once he arrived, his nerves and gut feeling got the best of him and he did not want to stay the night in that house. So he decided to stay at a motel. On his way to the driveway, he saw her. The person from before was there and staring at his house again. He was practically next to her and Greg was shocked that she didn't seem to notice him until he realized she had no eyes. It's like skin over where her eyes should be. She had practically no hair. Ah! Greg refuses to move out of fear that she'll hear him, but he did pull out his phone so he could take a video to show to the cops as evidence. This is the video. Bro, this was like a jump scare. I jumped out of my seat when I saw that. Greg ditched the motel idea and ran inside the house. Once he was safe inside, he peered out the window and she was gone. Greg called the police and they said they'll send an officer the next morning. Great. And this concludes the events of what happened on October 29. Now it's October 31st. Bad reception didn't allow him to post on October 30th. Anyways, the officer arrived, but the results were fruitless. Greg tried showing the officers evidence by pointing out the spot that had the clothes laying around, but all that was left was the notebook, which was empty. He then showed the photos of the artifacts and showed the video of the person in the hood, but the officer assumed he was getting pranked. In the end, the officer told Greg to call the station if anything happens and left. Greg, of course, was frustrated by this encounter, but what can he do? Now he's alone again, but he can practically feel the presence of the woman in the woods, which isn't exactly fun. While exploring near the lake, he confirmed that the houses nearby were indeed empty. He was truly alone. Or so he thought until he spotted people on a boat. Suspicious. Nighttime arrived, so Greg retired for the night, and in the morning those people were gone. Greg found the lake oddly safe, so he remained there for a good amount of his time, just to relax. Too bad something interrupted his breakfast when he spotted something in the water. Is that a ball? Ah, what the freak is that? Should I censor that? I think I will. It's an eyeball. Gross. How are you holding that? Assuming it probably belonged to an animal, Greg threw it back into the water, then returned home to wash his hands. Good. Oh, and the boat returns. Suspicious. November 6th, and Greg is starting to hear strange noises at night. At first he considered it was an animal, and while brushing his teeth, he heard screaming. The next morning, he discovered the remains of something. Spooky. It's gross, so obviously I'm gonna censor it here, but if you want to see it, go to the Twitter or whatever, I don't know. He uses the shovel and flung it into the woods. Sure, that will fix your problem. Now, Greg wants to learn what's written in the notebook, and in order to find out, he needs charcoal to rub on the pages that had shadow pen marks. He had to go to town to buy charcoal, but he couldn't help but notice how everyone was starting to get familiar with him, which he isn't too excited about, and while shopping, twins were following him, giggling and making fun of him. Why are kids so mean? Oh, and while shopping, he couldn't find any eggs, which is a bummer. The shop has been out for days. I wonder why. Anyways, he returns home and did the charcoal thing and discovered that within the notebook, it said, "They took my eyes." Yikes. November 9th, and Greg called his mother in hopes for answers. Turns out when he was young, he actually's been there before, but he just couldn't remember. Greg's mother soon asked about the wine in the cellar, which Greg wasn't aware of, so investigation time! There indeed was wine and a cellar. Old stuff too. Old, interesting stuff. The cellar must have been abandoned for a while because Greg found a dead rat that was decaying. Oof. But who cares, Greg now has alcohol. Anyways, I guess Greg was still in the mood to investigate, so outside he discovered a collapsed shed, something that looks like an old rabbit statue, and rusting letters. Interesting. November 21st, and bad reception is kicking Greg in the butt, making it difficult to update everyone on what's going on. So far, Greg is focusing on fixing up the house in order to sell it, but he also wants to visit the town so he can get away from the house for a while and enjoy a meal that's in the only restaurant in town. Greg described the experience as bizarre. He ordered eggs Benedict, but got no eggs. Sad. When he asked, it turns out they don't have any. While scanning the menu, it turns out eggs aren't anywhere on the menu. Suspicious. And once he left the restaurant, a family watched him leave in complete silence. They were obvious about it, and the twin girls just added to the spookiness. Time to return home, and when Greg did, he discovered something folded up wedged in his door. Leave. This isn't nice. This was also behind the paper. Okay. After all of that, Greg decided that he needed a drink. November 29, and to stay away from the house, Greg began to explore around the woods. He found a chair. This wouldn't have been creepy if it weren't for the fact it was pointing at the direction of his house. Time to leave, and that's what he did, but found this. Everything is just confusing Greg, and as he returns home, he saw the woman again. It's been weeks, hey! Anyway, she eventually left, and Greg used the opportunity to run back home. At this point, Greg is getting frustrated with the number of questions he has, but no answers to any of them. Shoot, I'd be frustrated too! Anyways, it's December, and remember the rusted letters from before? Greg solved it. Deepwater Chapel. He solved it by discovering a bookshelf, and within one of the books was an old Polaroid photo. Two specifically, and one gave the answer. Interesting, I wonder what this means. A chapel, The next day soon rolls around, and Greg was caught in the rain outside. While he left his clothes to dry, he went to bed and had a scary dream that involved his friend Eric. Eric was acting very spooky and asked this question. Is there somebody watching you sleep right now, Greg? This startled Greg awake, and now he can't brush out the feeling that someone was in his room. He soon heard a noise downstairs, and after hesitating for a bit, he went to check it out. Everything seemed normal, so he chalked it up to just being the wind outside and went to grab a snack. But dun dun dun! The kitchen door that leads outside was open! This was a surprise because Greg could have sworn he locked and closed the door. Soon he discovered that his clothes were missing, and not knowing who else could have done this, Greg assumed it was the mysterious lady, and he's going to find a locksmith. Somebody also brought this up to Greg, which is alarming to think about because if the no-eyed lady was able to walk in the house without bumping into anything or making any noise, she must know the layout of the house. Oh my. Greg went to stay at a motel and only left when the locksmith was able to do the job. When the locksmith gave the okay to come over, Greg hopped into his car and returned to the house. However, the drive was surprisingly quiet and lonely. No deer in sight or normal wood sounds. That was until something darted across the road. It was red and so fast that it just looked like a blur. Greg swerved and got his car stuck in a grove. Oof. Left with no other option, Greg had to walk the rest of the way so he could still meet with the locksmith. But just like the car ride, the woods were still ominously quiet and lonely. Not even the sounds of birds could be heard or small critters running around. The only noise Greg could hear is just his own footsteps. During the walk, he found some of those artifact things, and this time there was a glove in the center of the sticks. This glove was actually with his clothes that were stolen. He found more of his clothes in those artifacts. It was obviously both frightening and infuriating. Greg didn't bother touching them and started running so he could arrive home quicker, but no matter how fast he tried running, he just couldn't make it home. He should have arrived home by now, but the trip was taking so long. He slowed his pace to check his GPS, but for some odd reason, it couldn't locate where he was at. He decided to follow the sounds of the lake and kept moving in hopes to arrive home, but the walk took ages. He was now in an unfamiliar part of the woods, and surprisingly, he discovered this. Not sure what it was at first, Greg decided to move closer and found that it was a cluster of large eggs. And bro, they're huge! Bigger than Greg's boot! He touched the eggs and considered crushing one to see what was inside, but Greg kept his intrusive thoughts from winning and walked away so he could continue his journey to return home. Eventually, he arrived home and the locksmith changed his locks and deadbolted the door. Later, he called a tow truck to get his car out of the ditch, and after all of that, he was alone again. But hey, at least he's now safe with all the locks. December 28, and a noise was heard outside, scratching sounds and footsteps. Instead of being scared, Greg ran outside and caught someone running to the woods. Greg assumed it was the mysterious no-eyed lady but couldn't catch her, so he returned and discovered what was left behind. A large artifact with a sweatshirt in the middle. Fear the new moon was also carved into the wall. When I looked it up, a new moon is the moon phase when its dark side is towards the earth. It also symbolizes new beginnings. How interesting. January 5th was when the new moon was going to happen during Greg's stay. The day before, Greg found out that there was going to be a storm that day, and boy is that ominous. January 5th has arrived and Greg was correct about the storm. He had to stay inside all day and the thunder wasn't helping with his nerves. Greg is regretting his decision in staying and decided to leave the next day when the storm calms down. Greg went to the cellar to get some wine to calm himself, but guess who it is? Greg almost ran into her, but luckily the storm covered the noises he was making and just stood behind her. After an agonizing few seconds of doing nothing and being frozen in fear, she turned and spoke to Greg. "I won't hurt you. Let me explain everything." With that, she sat in the living room and Greg waited for her to explain. To sum up everything said, those stick artifacts were meant to protect Greg. Protect him from what? The things in the water. A long time ago, something came from the sky and swooshed into the lake, which was ancient and strange. The people at the time communicated with it and protected it from the outside world, and because of this, they received a gift. A long, healthy life and many children. However, they had to give a little more than just their protection for this gift. First it was one who slumbered in the lake, but they grew in numbers over time and now there's a sheesh ton. Remember those eggs? Yep. When they hatch, they need to feed. On what? On one of the many children the people in the town have. The parents of the town must take one of their children to the woods and they'll basically be sacrificing them to the egg creatures. This is the cost they must pay for the gifts they receive. And when the creatures feed, they usually start with the eyes. The reason why the lady knew about this is because she was one of the children who were sacrificed. The last thing she remembered seeing was watching an egg hatch in front of her and the thing inside latched onto her, tearing her eyes out. Ouch. "They took my eyes," she said, but without the swear word. What happened next was a bit fuzzy in her memories because she wasn't sure if she escaped on her own or if someone helped her, but she got away and ran until she couldn't anymore. Too scared to return home, she remained in the woods, and that was now her home. Greg was at a loss for words and wanted to ask so many questions but struggled for a bit until he was able to muster enough courage to ask this. "Why are you telling me this now, after all this time?" "It's the same every year. They come out of the water in the fall, lay their eggs. A few of them begin to hatch early. They feed on the animals in the woods. They need strength to make it back to the water. The most of them hatch in the darkness. Tonight is the new moon. Tonight is the ceremony," she answered. Greg quickly realized that right now kids are being sacrificed and wanted to stop it, but the lady said it couldn't be stopped. Greg refused to accept this and ran outside. The rain stopped, which is perfect timing because running in the rain must be difficult, but it's still dark out. While running, Greg heard noises all around him and saw things moving through the trees. Eventually, he spotted lights in the distance, and he pulled out his phone to snap photos of the things running around him. What is that? Ugh! Look, eggshells! Oh no, eggshells! The lights in the distance started to vanish and Greg decided to run to the lake. Once he reached the lake, it was silent and all that was seen was ripples in the water. Greg was too late. Feeling defeated, Greg went home and the lady was gone. He was alone again and wasn't sure what to do besides being sorry. January 19th, and Greg didn't post for a while because he left after that night to return to his actual home. He doesn't plan on selling the house, it's too dangerous for that, so he's keeping it. Greg has to start school soon, but he hopes next time he could stop it from happening again. How will he do that? Who knows? And that's it. Seriously? This is my favorite ARG and that's all? Am I missing something? Am I insane? Did Greg die? Probably. Maybe he returned to the house and the eggs got him. I don't know. And look at this. The only liked tweet from this account was this tweet. Is that no-eyed lady's Greg's mother's twin, or are we looking far too much into it? Again, I don't know. This is the ARG that got me interested in ARGs in the first place. And it's been 4 years. I miss you, bruh. I'm sad, but honestly, I learned to accept that if the project is done, it's done. I'm just glad it happened, and it's genuinely still interesting and one of my favorites. Anyways, to simplify and summarize everything, strange town and woods, lake creatures, eggs hatching with creatures that gobble up the town folks' children, and a lady with no eyes that was the only one that got away. Oh, and a dude who also got caught up on all of this because he inherited a house from his grandfather. Yep, and now we don't know where his whereabouts are. Wowee. Again, one of my favorite ARGs. I miss ya, bruh. But I accept that if this is over, it's over. Peace out. I better not catch you dying on me. And yeah, I have a new mic. Peace out. Bye.